All right, Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod, this is Herod the Great, the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? We have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. But let's address Herod first. There's some things we need to know about Herod that are very significant for today. Because if you will, there is a spirit behind that's motivating Herod that is still in operation today. Okay? In the church, believe it or not. And Jesus warned of it. We'll get to it in a moment. Herod was not a Jew. So here he is king in Jerusalem, and he has absolutely no business sitting on the throne. He's not a Jew. He was born in 72 BC. He was an Edomite who was politically placed in power by the Romans. He was not born a king. That's why he gets upset. Nor was he anointed. David was anointed. Even Saul was anointed. How many kings were anointed throughout the Old Testament? But he wasn't anointed. He was a shrewd politician who knew how to punch the right buttons, to manipulate Rome to keep his throne for three decades, because this is the 35th year of his reign. 35 years he had been in office. Okay? In order to stay in office for 35 years, with all the upheavals and stuff in that day, you had to know how to play the political game. And he did it, and did it well. He, as far as him personally, he was a paranoid tyrant. He was a basket case, we'd call it. He lived in constant fear of someone overthrowing him. And therefore, he was a manipulator. Now, there are some things that I'm going to share with you tonight that's not in the Word, but it is in early Christian writings. Okay? It is in early Christian writings that we see. We see from Josephus, we see from Origen, we see from Justin Martyr and a lot of these early Christian writers. We see where what they have, just like our history books. We value what we see written in our history books, and we take it and believe it is true because it was official acts of history. Well, it's the same way in biblical history. There are things that are noted in the scrolls. There are things that are noted that they're still uncovering that we are finding more and more lessons about. His first official act in office was to slaughter the entire Sanhedrin. It is written that he removed the high priest and he installed his own priest and his Sanhedrin. So therefore, they were illegitimate puppets. Herod manipulated the high priest. He manipulated the Sanhedrin, just like a religious mafia. Josephus, y'all have heard of him, and others recorded this. He killed 45 nobles in one instance. Other people just disappeared. You pose a threat to me, you're going to disappear, just like the mafia. Also noting this, he ordered his wife Miriam executed when a mere rumor circulated that she was conspiring to overthrow. Whether that was any truth to it, we don't know. But he heard of a conspiracy, and her name was mentioned in it, and he had her killed. He also had his brother-in-law killed, and his own 3 elder sons throughout the years under the same suspicion. Perhaps they heard where, David, you had Absalom, trying to usurp David's throne. Maybe he's heard all that and he had read all that through the Old Testament scriptures and said, hey, I don't want that happening to me. He was known for his rampages. He had a temper. And he was slaughtered at the slightest threat. Now, as far as him being an entrepreneur, he was a great visionary. He was a great builder. He was a great expander. He's responsible for the city of Masada, which you still hear about today. The palace called Herodium is credited to him. All these things were built to reinforce his stranglehold on the position. It is said he altered his will 6 times during his life because of having gotten rid of family members. Now I got to change my will. It is also recorded that he died of sexual diseases from escapades with an unimaginable number of women. I mean, he was something. It says this sounds gross, it says he died of worms in his organs. But on his deathbed, he ordered to have all the Jewish princes corralled and slaughtered the moment he died. That was part of his last will and testament. Instead, they were all released, and it was a time of rejoicing. The peaceful people were finally rejoicing over his death. We got rid of this paranoid tyrant. Now, it is recorded that he died in 4 BC. The calendar's off. Well, if he ordered the slaughter before he died, when he was in good health, if he ordered the slaughter of children, as we'll see, 2 years of age and younger, in an attempt to snuff out Jesus, that means Jesus had to be born at least between 6 to 7 BC. The calendar is that far off. Okay? And that's important to know. He lived in a time where there was one conspiracy after the other. There were civil disturbances, there were plots, and there were attempts and uprisings to try to overthrow. Therefore, he was in constant fear. That's why it says in verse 3, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. Because they knew good and well, if Herod got upset, he was going on a rampage, and he had no problem whatsoever slaughtering people. Matthew 2:1, and behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that has been born King of the Jews? For we have saw his star in the east, we have seen his star in the east, and we are come to worship him. Okay, notice king is capitalized. King of the Jews. The word behold is a sense of amazement, a sense of bewilderment, a sense of shock and wonder. People were shocked to see this caravan of wise men coming into town. They were very shocked because they knew something was up. They didn't just come for cordial visits. They normally came on business. And we're going to tell you how much power they had in just a moment here. Now, the word said, the King James says wise men, and that's a bad translation, if you will. But we understand the reason for it. Okay, I'd say bad translation. It's not an accurate translation because in the Greek it's M-A-G-O-S, magos. It's pronounced magi. Okay, even if you look up the pronunciation, it says magi. But even I have difficulty. You get used to tradition to say the magi, okay, or the wise men. But the magi. Herodotus, which is a Greek historian, he helps identify who these magi were. He identifies them as a sacred caste of Medes that provided priests for Persia. They were known as spiritual advisors to the king. So they're coming into town, they could be giving some spiritual advice to the king, whether he wanted to hear it or not. But they were known and they had a reputation. But there's more to it. Let's go with the phrase, the wise men. Let me ask you, what is it that makes someone wise, even today? Okay, experience, I like that, okay? All right, well, if you look at it from a biblical standpoint, the definition of it, so forth and so on, you would agree when I say that wisdom comes from one personal experience. We all learn from our mistakes. We all learn from experience. I mean, how do we do our job so effectively? Because we've learned from experience. Wisdom also comes from practical observation. You're just watching. You gain wisdom just by watching, learning from others. And then thirdly, it comes from divine revelation. Okay? So personal experience, practical observation, and divine revelation. And we're going to see all three come into play when they see this star. Now notice, it says, see, as we noted last week, we have been programmed by Christmas carols. What's one of them relating to the Magi? We three kings of Orient are. Okay? They were not kings. Let me read to you. This is Tertullian, a church father and a theologian that many have perhaps heard of. We're familiar with him from, studying the early Christian writings in this context and others. But they were powerful and they were very political. They were like kings in many respects, so that's why they were called that. Because they were so royal, they were so respected. They put forth that kingly air about them. Here's a quote from Tertullian. Magi were elite, powerful, fabulously wealthy group of high-ranking priests who were devoted to interpreting dreams and studying the constellations, who gained an international reputation for being experts at studying constellations, which was regarded as a science at the time, as it is today, astronomy. Okay? They were expert astronomers because that's where they got wisdom from. I would venture to say, in my opinion, they probably helped predict the seasons of the year, about when to plant and stuff like that. They could probably tell just by studying the sky. Now, there's something to be said about that. Now, you got to understand, astronomy, okay, astrology, okay? We're saying astronomy here. Because even God had Abraham look up into the heavens and count the stars. So shall your descendants be, okay? Now, the most reputable Greek theologian and Greek historian of our day, here's a quote from him. They were a combination of scientists, politicians, religious leaders. They were staggeringly wealthy, and they possessed so much might and so much political clout that if they chose to do so, and if they as a group agreed upon it, they had the ability to depose a king with just a word. They could oust a king just like that. Likewise, with a single word, they could install a new king of their preference in place of the one they deposed, I should say. They had the power to depose a king. Now you know why Herod's shaking in his boots. And especially when you find out they had already warned him years earlier. You better watch it. Now he's returning. This ain't the first time they come to visit Herod. Okay? For this reason, they were viewed as king makers and king breakers, so to speak, in eastern lands. And without their endorsement, it would have been difficult for anyone to become king or even to remain king, unless you knew how to work Rome. You knew how to manipulate Rome, as Herod did. So now you can understand, here I am, a shrewd politician. I know how to punch the right buttons with Rome to hang on to my job. And here come these cats from afar who have the ability and they have the power to oust a king, regardless of how long he's been in office. They were so powerful that there's no equivalent in today's world. In addition, they held the reins of the financial, economical aspects of the area, the religious. They were the religious, most respected religious authorities of the day, scientific, and they held the reins of political power. As we said, they could depose a king in a minute. And no king wanted to mess with them. The best way I could describe that today. Now, we know our current president, Donald Trump, is very wealthy. He's been wealthy long before he got in office. Okay, but let's just say we had a president in office that wasn't as wealthy. We know that Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, he's not easily intimidated. Okay? So he probably wouldn't be shaking in his boots like Herod is. But say, for instance, you had a group of wise men that included Elon Musk, which does have an influence in Washington now. Say, for instance, you had, Zuckerberg, who, was the one that did Facebook. And you had Jeff Bezos, the one that Amazon. Okay? Say, for instance, you had other guys like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, all these guys who are worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And if they all got together as a collective group and they traveled the world, whether it's China, the United States, whether they went to Germany, whether they went wherever, and as a collective group, they held so much economical and political power that they could basically rule the world. That's what we're talking about here when these Magi came into town. The Magi date back to Daniel, as you know, who was promoted from one king to another king, serving the Babylonian Empire, the Mede and Persian kings, including Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Darius, and Cyrus. Daniel was part of all those administrations. Scholars believe that Daniel eventually became the head of the Magi. And therefore, everything Daniel said, everything that was recorded that Daniel mentioned, any prophecy that he got from the Lord was considered sacred. Okay? So these wise men held on to Daniel as their forefather, so to speak, as the original Magi. So they widely regarded Daniel, and they knew Daniel's prophecies up one side and down the other. Well, these prophecies, as the case with other prophecies we'll see, in Micah and Isaiah and one's places like that, that many of these prophecies pointed to Jesus coming, the Messiah coming. And what do you think the probability of these messianic prophecies being fulfilled? There are a number of them. There are at least about 300. Some say 330 messianic prophecies throughout the Old Testament about the Messiah coming. Some of them are subtle. Some of them are, 2 or 3 verses long. Obviously, we know Isaiah 7:14. She shall give birth to a child, and the name shall be called Emmanuel. Obviously, we know my favorite verse in the Old Testament, Isaiah 9:7. For unto us a child is born, for unto us a son is given. All those messianic prophecies. What do you think the probability was of Jesus fulfilling these messianic prophecies? Well, you've got people who are smarter than I. You got people who are mathematically wiser than I. You got those who are biblical scholars way beyond my pay grade. And they did some calculations. Okay? I don't know if you've heard these calculations and these statistics before. Okay, do you understand? I don't mean if you don't say no, then you're not, don't feel bad. I know these school teachers over here. I know they don't count. They can't answer. Okay? But I know that they know what scientific notation is. Okay? So if you've got something like 2 times, instead of saying 200, you can say 2 times 10 to the second power because of how many zeros there is. So 10 to the second power is 100. 2 times that would be 200. Okay? That's scientific notation. Just to give you the shortcut version of it. Okay. Here is the probability of Jesus fulfilling only 8 messianic prophecies. It is 1 in 10 to the 17th power. Somebody a whole lot smarter than me, a theologian from Texas. That's why the illustration is going to be a Texas illustration. A well-renowned theologian of our day from Texas calculated this when it comes to square miles of Texas and so forth and so on. Here's a probability of Jesus fulfilling 8 of those messianic prophecies. It would be the same as putting silver dollars and spreading silver dollars all across the state of Texas 2 feet high, having marked only one of those silver dollars. This is the whole state of Texas. Arguably, if not indeed, the biggest state in America. 2 feet high across the whole state of Texas. Silver dollars, right beside each other, stacked up. And for somebody to go and pick one silver dollar out of that stack anywhere in the state of Texas and getting the one with that mark on it, that's the likelihood of Jesus fulfilling 8 messianic prophecies. 1 in 10 to the 17th power. To do 18 of them, 1 in 10 to the 45th power. to fulfill 48 of them, 1 in 10 to the 157th power. Yet Jesus fulfilled all 300 plus messianic prophecies. Don't tell me God is not smarter than science. Amen? Okay. Now, these magi, despite what we think, most likely did not come in a party of 3. Well, I can definitely tell you they didn't come in just a party of 3 like you see on a Christmas card. Okay? Even if there were 3, which is believed there were more. But even if there were 3, there would have been a massive caravan. Because these wise men, these magi, carried their own army. Now, how many were there? How many have you heard? How many wise men or magi have you heard through your study and everything? Maybe through Sunday school lessons and stuff. How many have you heard? Anybody? Tradition says 3, and I'll tell you where that comes from. That's derived from early frescoes, which are paintings, and they're completely unverified. But it's just a matter of somebody doing a painting. And this painting had 3 wise men on it. One was named Casper, the oldest of the 3, and he was around 60 years of age. He was European looking, and he had a white beard, and the fresco has him carrying gold. You have Melchior, who was a middle-aged wise man, about 40 years of age, and he was Persian. And he is carrying frankincense. And then you have Balthazar, a young wise man, about the age of 20, just getting into the ranks here. He was Ethiopian looking, and he is pictured as carrying myrrh. That painting is where a lot of the story comes, we 3 kings. But it's not substantiated in the word. It doesn't tell us how many. But according to early Christian writings of that day, it seems to indicate there were more. They could have assembled from Persia, Assyria, Babylonia, Arabia, and the Median regions. This would have required them to travel across the Syrian desert to Damascus. Across the Syrian desert to Damascus. When they finally got to Damascus, they would have to turn southward and go along the Sea of Galilee until they finally reached Jerusalem. From where they believed they originated, calculating the route that they took, hanging a left and going southward, it is estimated they traveled 1,000 to 1,200 miles. Okay? Now, we talked last week about Mary and Joseph going 70 to 90 miles and her being pregnant, and the average walking distance was, 20 miles a day. Okay, well, you do the math here. Now, in addition to that, you're talking a massive caravan. And we're going to tell you what's all in this caravan. But before that even occurred, to answer your question that you began with. So if you're figuring 1,000 to 1,200 miles, and even if they were all able to travel 20 miles a day, but you got to factor in, it would take longer for them to break camp, to set up camp, break camp, when you find out how many people are actually in this caravan. There were hundreds. There were a lot of people in this caravan. That's why when they all come bombarding into Jerusalem, it gets everyone's attention. So this was a massive caravan here. So how long does it take for them? How many miles could they actually travel per day? Then in addition to that, you got to figure the time they spent before they even set sail, before they even departed, preparing and fashioning an extensive amount of magnificent gifts that was fit for a king. Remember, we've talked about this before. We preached a sermon, okay? A gift fit for a king. They know who they're going to go see. And they're not just going to see an ordinary king. Now, I'm not trying to give it away, because when we get to next week, it's going to blow you away when you find the magnitude of the gifts that they transported. And you're going to see it took an army to bring all that they transported, according to early Christian writers, church fathers. Okay? So it took probably weeks and months for them to even compile the treasures, to get them all together, because they came from different lands. Did you see that star? Yeah. Did you see that star? Yeah. Did you see that star? Okay. Is this the star? We believe it is. What do you think? Yeah, we believe it is. Everybody agree this is it? Absolutely. Okay. Now let's go prepare gifts. All that takes time. Okay? So therefore, it's nearly, just from the math, it's nearly 2 years later. And of course, you get that from the fact that Herod, when he ascertains, as we'll get to, we're not there yet in the verse, but when he ascertains from the Magi when they first saw the star, which was your question, he himself, as well as the chief priests and scribes, they do the calculation. And that's why he says, kill all those 2 years of age and younger, not 1 year of age and younger, not 3 years of age and younger, but 2 years of age and younger. Because even his estimate, based on where y'all came from, when you saw the star, how long after seeing the star before you departed, how long it took you to get here, they surely told him. They probably had record how long they've been traveling, how many miles and how many days. And from that, he got that figure, 2 years of age and younger. Therefore, he was estimating the child has to be almost 2 by now. That's how long it took the Magi to get there. There is absolutely no way they're at a statement. If only, well, before I get that, they did not necessarily camel along as tradition says. We 3 kings. No. They were so powerful and they were so wealthy. Don't you think they needed Secret Service, so to speak? Don't you think they needed security? And one guy ain't gonna cut it. They had to have a massive army traveling along with them wherever they went, especially if they were going collectively, as they do here. One going by himself somewhere to visit a king, just like the Queen of Sheba went to visit Solomon. One going, that might be a little bit different story. You know, a handful of people. But for this caravan, and the gifts that they're transporting, and you've got thieves and robbers who were looking for people to travel along the road so they can go and steal from them, and they see the gold, they see all the expensive gifts traveling along in this caravan. Don't you think it took a massive army to protect not only the wise men, but it took a massive army to protect the treasures? And again, next week we'll show you what all they brought. So it took also, besides the army, who's constantly looking out, it took a workforce to be able to assemble and disassemble camp. Just like Army. Just like, one of my favorite shows to this day is still MASH. I love MASH, especially the early episodes with Frank Burns. Okay? After Frank Burns leaves, it's like, I don't care about watching it, All right? But especially those episodes. But even you take that little setting of MASH, you got those who are out fighting a battle, and then you got those who are doing things at the camp. Same way here. You got to have an army that's not trained to fight, but it's trained to cook, clean, pack up, set up, travel, load and unload. You got to have people to do that. I'm telling you, there were hundreds of people in this caravan. If there were 3 magi, it would require several hundred servants, soldiers, and bodyguards. If there were 12, as many theologians suggest, when you consider where they came from, there were as many as 12. Easily 1,000 or more. Highly trained army of troops known to be the best military units available. These were the SEAL teams, so to speak. We need somebody that could beat the best of them. Who we might face. There were archers noted in church history. They had long-range bows, and they had galloping archers. You had those who were on feet, and you had those who were on horseback. If they needed to gallop and fight those that they could see coming across the plain. You had sword fighters who had proven they could beat a Roman soldier. They were that special forces type. Now, it is known that the Magi traveled in massive and luxurious caravans. Just like what you see on TV. These nice chariots, these nice majestic chariots and these long caravans. Beautiful coaches. And they were carried on poles by servants. Got to have servants to carry the poles to carry every one of these wise men. I don't know how much they weigh, but if you carry me, you better have at least 6. Okay? You better have at least a number of pallbearers, that you take to pick up a casket. And especially to go that distance, to carry a casket, 6 to 8 pallbearers this day and time? Just to go from a church to the hearse or from the hearse to the gravesite. Imagine how many shifting and trading on and off, walking that distance, carrying these wise men on their coaches, on their shoulders, on poles. Okay? Then they were draped, from early Christian writings, they were draped with lavish materials to protect these magi from the sun and the wind. Any of the elements, the rain, the sun, the wind. So they were well protected here. It is often said that they often dressed down during the journey. We're not saying they went down to their boxer shorts, but they didn't have all that royal robe on there. It was draped across the couch or something. But then when they got close to where they were going to arrive, then they paused and got dressed looking dignified. So with all their formal clothes and all their jewelry, they pulled out all that. Okay, let me adorn, because they need to make a show. We're wealthy and we're going to show it. So in Matthew 2:2, it says they arrived and it says they were asking. The Greek tense of that verb means they were repeatedly asking and asking. They didn't just walk in and one time say, "Where is he who's born King of the Jews?" No, they went throughout the town repeatedly asking, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews?" And again, king is capitalized. It says the word seen. That word seen in the Greek means it was a scrutinizing look. We had seen through intense examination a star. We didn't just happen to see it and then it went away. No, we have scrutinized it. Now, how long did it take to scrutinize it? To verify this is a star. Before everybody came together and decided to leave. Before they packed up. Before they traveled 1,000 or 1,200 miles. How long did it take for them to sit there and study to make sure this is the right one? Okay? Now, when they come and they say, "Where is he who's been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and we've come to worship him." What you don't realize is in that statement, they're expecting everybody else to answer their question. We saw the star. Surely you did too. You see what I'm saying? The way they're asking it, they're expecting them to answer the question. Why else would you ask it? They're not asking for directions. They just want to know, where has he been born? As if you know, and say for instance he had been born in the royal palace, Herod's palace, because they were expecting a royal Messiah. Let's just say that's where he was born. Everybody would be pointing out over there. Go down here and hang a left, and just a few paces on your right, there you'll find it. See, they were expecting everybody to know what they're talking about, and nobody did. That shocked them. Now, what about this star? Again, the Magi were experts at studying the constellations. They believed that this particular star, this particular sign, whenever they saw it, based on Daniel's writings and based on what they understood, that there would be a certain star coming from these prophecies. Okay, and we can read you some of those prophecies. In Genesis 49, Micah 5:2, other places like that. Numbers, that they have these words that says there will be a certain star that will appear. Well, let's come a little more recent. There was a German scientist, a mathematician, and philosopher named Kepler. And he proposed that there was indeed an alignment that occurred in 7 BC between Jupiter and Saturn and the moon in the constellation of Aries. So you had Jupiter and Saturn and the moon. That was alignment. Now Jupiter is significant because it was associated with royalty. Okay? So the alignment would have been perceived if they saw a star, if they saw Jupiter, if all of a sudden they could see Jupiter somehow. They're just speculating here. Because this is what Kepler, a very renowned scientist, mathematician, astronomer, has writings that in 7 BC there was a constellation. It is recorded. There was a alignment, and it could have facilitated the appearing of this star. Now, in verse 3, it says, when Herod heard the king had heard these things, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Herod's like, what? That's the last thing I needed to hear today. A threat to my throne? How many people have I killed because of that particular statement? A conspiracy. So as a result, these guys coming in starting up a hornet's nest. Where's who's been born king of the Jews? All Jerusalem along with him is stirred up because they're like, when Herod hears this, he's going to be mad. He's going on a rampage. Kids, get in the house. Get in that house. Whatever business deals you got going, whatever plans you had, cancel them. We're going home. We don't want to be on the streets when Herod hears what they're asking. We don't want any member of our family in jeopardy because he might just kill anybody that looks at him wrong. Now, he had previously had people scourged and imprisoned for any kind of information having to do with a plot. This sounds like a plot. If you are paranoid, this is a plot. Where's he who's been born king of the Jews? Okay? Now, what is the significance of that statement? Born king of the Jews. Who was not born a king? Herod. Who was not a Jew? Herod. Who has no legal right to the throne that he's been sitting on for 35 years? Herod. Don't you see why he's paranoid? He had to manipulate his way to keep it. He was put there by the Romans because of how shrewd he was. And yet he knew how to manipulate them to keep his job. And now there is a rightful heir. So he calls an emergency meeting with the chief priests and the scribes. And it says he demanded, that means he interrogated him. I want to know where this king of the Jews, so to speak, that they speak of, where is he to be born? He wants to know from the scriptures. And of course, they're going to quote Micah 5:2 in particular. All right, we'll see that in a couple of minutes. But we got to address something because we said at the beginning that what the demonic spirit that is fueling Herod still operates in the church today. Believe it or not. This may come a shock to you. In Mark chapter 8 and verse 15, Jesus himself said, watch out, he told the disciples, watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Jesus, 30 to 33 years later, he warns, watch out for the leaven of Herod. What is the leaven of Herod? Now, the leaven of Herod and the leaven of the Pharisees, it's a little easier to describe the leaven of the Pharisees. So let me begin with that. The leaven of the Pharisees that Jesus warned about is the religious spirit. And if you will, it's rooted in 2 Timothy 3:5, where it says they have a form of godliness, but deny the power thereof. That's the religious spirit. That's the leaven of the Pharisees. Now, leaven, you know, is yeast. And leaven, it only takes a little bit to be able to permeate the whole loaf. A little leaven leavens the whole lump, it says in the word. It don't take much yeast. And then it is activated by heat. Herod's hotter than a collar. This leaven is activated by heat. But the leaven of the Pharisees is a religious spirit that says we want form, we want tradition, and we don't want Holy Spirit moving in this place. Jesus warned about it in Matthew 23:13. He says, woe to you, you scribes and you Pharisees, you hypocrites. He says, because you refuse to enter into the kingdom, and the kingdom is found in the Holy Spirit, Romans 14:17. And he says, and you won't let those who want to enter in. That's the religious spirit. Okay? It has a form of godliness. We're a church. We do Christian things. We have Christian activity. We have Christian programs. We do missions. We do everything. But we don't allow Holy Spirit to move in this place. We don't want to have that style of worship, which your pastor and Michelle and the girls have tried to bring forth, where the Spirit of God can move in a place. But the leaven of the Pharisee says, we don't want the Spirit of God moving in this place. The leaven of Herod. It is a political spirit and is humanistic in nature. It has to do with man being at the center of his own universe. You know, man is his own center type of thing. Now that's how what it's ballooned into. But let's go back for the sake of our study at its roots, because it is named the leaven of Herod. What is the leaven of Herod? I'm going to give you the simple definition of the leaven of Herod. And it is this: when one's coveted attention is given to another. When one's coveted attention is given to another. Now, that happens politically. That happens in business. That happens in sports. That happens in the workplace. That happens in the church. When one's coveted attention is given to another. Herod coveted everyone's attention, everyone's power. I am king. You do what I tell you to do. I'm not a rightful Jew. I wasn't born a king. I have no rightful right to the throne. And here there's a message saying, where is he who has been born, upset scene, king, capital K, Messiah, of the Jews? All three words tick him off. Born a king, he's not born a king. Capital K, referring to the Messiah, not just an average king, but the king of the Jews. And Jewish, and I'm not Jewish, I'm an Edomite. So I'll be doggone if you're going to give my coveted attention to someone that they're speaking of. It ain't happening. So I want to know where this person's at so I can snuff him out. I want to know. Because my coveted attention will not be given to another. That would be no different if, and I can say this because I know he's not. And it's not because I'm greater in any way. No, if anything, I'm lesser than your pastor. Okay? He has a great, powerful anointing upon his life as a pastor. But let's just say, for instance, he got wind that, Sunday morning we're running 80 to 100. But my goodness, on Wednesday nights, this place is packed, is standing room only. If he got wind out there, my goodness, the cars out there. They're lined up down the road, down to the cemetery here. And they're all coming for the Wednesday night Bible study. And all of a sudden, if he was to get jealous, because he's sitting there thinking, they'll come on Wednesday, but they won't come on Sunday. My coveted attention is being given on Wednesday when I would like to have this place full on Sunday. And if as a result he began to attack me because of that, that is the leaven of Herod. That's what the leaven of Herod is in the church. If, say, for instance, you got a pastor and then you got a youth pastor. And the youth pastor gets an opportunity to preach, and everybody just loves when the youth pastor preaches. And there comes that jealousy in the senior pastor. There comes that jealousy in the pastor that says, okay, my coveted attention, they're not complimenting my sermons, but they are going all out and raving about the youth pastor sermon, so to speak. When one's coveted attention is given to another, and it happens in the church today. It's what causes church splits. It's what causes preachers to get run off. Not because they were fired, but because they resigned. Being in that line of work, you'll be surprised how many ministers resigned just to, hey, I ain't dealing with this. I'm gone. And that's why it's so hard for people to have pastors. Because it not only exists among pastors, but it also exists among deacon boards. You know, so-and-so's gaining a lot of popularity and they're really following him, but we control things here. And our stranglehold of position is threatened. So therefore, we got to run him off. That's the only way we can get our stranglehold of position back. It's what Jesus spied in the Pharisees. That's why he said, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. They were jealous of the attention Jesus was getting. He's drawing thousands of people. And they're saying this number of people don't show up in synagogue. These people don't never darken the door of the synagogue. And yet they're coming to him and sitting on a mountainside and listening to him by the seashore, and they're listening to him. And their coveted attention, we want you coming to us for counseling, and yet you're going to him. And they said, we got to crucify the guy. It is the leaven of Herod. It's when one's coveted attention is given to another. And it still operates today. And those who can spiritually discern, you can see it. You can see it in operation by subtle remarks, by that power play, by how the people raise their tone of voice in a meeting, whether it's a church business meeting or a deacon's meeting. They fly off the handle. They get their feathers ruffled. What it is, they feel like they're losing control to someone else. Now, in this case with Herod, and in the case with others, let's say you have someone who did the Democratic thing. They sent in a resume to a church. Maybe they applied to the Allendale Hampton Baptist Association and said, do you have a church in your area in need of a pastor? We want to apply for a position in your district. Okay? They say, okay, we got this church and we have a position filled. Hey, would you like to come? Sure, I'll take it. No mention God has called them to the area. No mention of having prayed about it and the Lord said, this is where we want you. There was a position available. We filled it. Now, what if the person who was supposed to be the pastor of that church, who was being groomed to be the pastor of that church, what happens when the one who is not there because he was called of God to be there, but he was politically put there? He was put in place by the association, and he wasn't called to that community, to that church. And I know from what little I know, and I don't know a lot, but from what little I know, throughout the history of this church, y'all have dealt with that. And that's the reason why y'all had to have some pastors just going their way. Because it just wasn't the right fit. They were filling a position. But what happens when you have the anointed one? It's the same thing happened with Saul. Saul has slain his thousands. David has slain his 10,000s. My coveted attention is being given to David. I got to kill David, is what Saul's thinking. And it may not be murder in the day society, but it is, I got to run him off. But it still operates today. When one's coveted attention, especially if you got someone who is not anointed to be there, but was appointed to be there, and yet the anointed one is obvious. David is the obvious king of Israel. Saul, Herod is king. Jesus, the obvious Messiah, the rightful heir to the throne. So if you've got anyone who is an outsider, if you got anyone who is in their position politically, or because they're just filling a position because their resume was accepted, and they're there, and yet someone comes along, maybe it's the minister they had to come and preach the revival. So he knew he was an outsider, and he knew that his throne was being threatened. So let me wrap it up here by saying this. What is the common denominator between the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod? The common denominator of both spirits is this, the fear of man. What's man going to think? Or what are they thinking? What are they thinking of me? What are they thinking of them? What greater are they thinking of them than they are thinking of me? If I make this decision, or if I preach this sermon for a pulpit, who am I going to run off? Who's going to fly off the handle, get mad, leave the church, and take their good tithes and offerings with them? They're afraid of that, so they water down the gospel. And they preach a watered down gospel just to keep people in the pew, just to keep those good tithers satisfied. And it's the same spirit in operation today. Herods fear those who are Christ differentiated. They know that there's an anointing upon that life. Saul could see there was anointing upon David's life. I mean, when you see it, it's obvious, okay? It happens in the workplace. Maybe you can relate. Maybe there may be a manager that's reluctant to give you, a believer, a position out of fear that you're going to do it so well that you're coming after their job. And as a result, they don't want you to get that assistant manager position because they know and they've seen how well you work. And if we allow you to get the assistant manager position, then you might next get my managerial position. So the efforts to put that person down, make them look bad. Oh, this happened on your watch. You know, you didn't do this duty, the tattling, all that kind of stuff. That's leaven of Herod. We've talked about it from the standpoint of ministry. Those who want to suppress and keep them down. Even somebody in the church who's growing in the Lord. Say, for instance, you got somebody who's growing in the Lord, and you know good and well they'd be an excellent vacation Bible school director, but you want to keep them down. They would be an excellent choir director, but you want to keep them down. They would be an excellent one to fill the pulpit when the pastor's out, but you want to keep them suppressed. There is a term for it today that is used in Australia and New Zealand in the natural. And I don't know if you ever heard of this. It's called tall poppy syndrome. Has anybody ever heard of tall poppy syndrome? When you've got a field of poppies growing out there, and you got a poppy that stands up and sticks out above the rest, they're instructed to go cut that one because it's standing out among all the rest. We want all the poppies to be the same height. And you got one that's growing spiritually at a more rapid rate than everybody else around here. And we can't have that because that would threaten our stranglehold on the position that we now have. So the efforts to suppress, the efforts to hold back, the efforts to restrain, the efforts to criticize, it's all part of the leaven of Herod. Even the disciples were so quick to fill Judas's position. Let's cast lots and name Matthias, knowing good and well Paul was the one destined for that position. But they couldn't wait. Our bylaws say we got to have 12. So let's cast lots right now. You never hear Matthias again. And yet that apostle was intended to be Saul, who would become Paul, if they would have just waited a little bit. But they got antsy. So, the leaven of Herod is seen plain as day in this study. It's plain as day. Now, next week, we're going to get into what you really are really interested in. And that is their visit to Jesus and the magnitude of their gifts. Any questions?